everyone. I'm President Sarah Mangelsdorf, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this special event. It's great to have Mark Ain with our university community today to speak about his new book, Not Just in Time, The Story of Kronos Incorporated from Concept to Global Entity. Since I became president of the University of Rochester, I've enjoyed many conversations and meetings with Mark. I will always remember fondly the first time I met Mark and his wife, Carolyn, in person. My husband, Carl, and I had a lovely dinner with them in Florida in early February of 2020, shortly before the whole world closed down. I've been extremely grateful for Mark's perspective and input as such an accomplished leader and strategic thinker. Mark has helped guide our university, the Simon Business School, and of course, our fabulous cross-disciplinary efforts in the area of entrepreneurship. For all of this and much more, we are very grateful. Mark is the founder, past CEO, and former executive chairman of the board of Kronos, now named UKG, a workforce management company. He led Kronos from its founding in 1977 to 2005 to become one of the world's most successful software companies. Under his leadership, Kronos sustained one of the longest records of growth and profitability in the software industry and earned the reputation as the market leader in workforce management. Mark received his Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and his MBA from the University of Rochester's Simon Business School. A longtime supporter of entrepreneurship at the university and at Simon, Mark is a life member of the university's Board of Trustees, as well as a member of the Ain Center Advisory Council, the Simon National Council, and the Simon Advisory Council. In recognition of Mark and Carolyn's collective philanthropy, the Ain Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation was named in their honor in 2015. They are also charter members of the George Eastman Circle, the university's leadership annual giving society. Mark will now be joined by Brendan McCaughey, a 2010 graduate of the college, a 2011 MBA graduate from Simon, and a chair of the Ain Center Advisory Council for conversation about his new book and the lessons he has learned as an entrepreneur. Brennan and Mark, I now turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate the introduction. And I know we've had some technical difficulties with Mark on the line, but Mark, are you there?
All of the sensors were out, and I finally got some of them working, but I couldn't get the Zoom working on the computer or my iPad, so I'm pulling in.
No problem. No problem. Well, we're glad to have you, Mark. Sorry we can't see you today, but glad to have you on the phone. And maybe I would just start by saying I've had the opportunity to know Mark for a while and have heard parts of the Kronos story, but I really enjoyed reading the book, Mark. So thank you for writing it. Thank you for telling your story. For those of you who don't know, the book, as Sarah mentioned, it chronicles Mark's story from his upbringing and his inspiration from his grandmother to his path to MIT and the workforce, along with his entrance into the graduate school at the University of Rochester, later to be named Simon. In fact, Mark was in the inaugural class, the first business school class from a graduate level, and how it helped change his life and his path as he went on to found Kronos. So Mark, I thought maybe we would start, if you don't mind, just giving some folks a description of Kronos and what the company does.
Okay, well, originally I was looking for a product that could be sold for less than $10,000 internationally. And after 3 years of looking, I found the mechanical time clock, which had not changed in many, many decades. So I decided that to invent a version of that which would total people's hours automatically when they punch out. It's that simple.
That's great, Mark. Yeah, and for those who haven't had the chance to read the book, I really encourage you, obviously, to read it. I think for some folks that are there in person, there are books available. It's a great story of Mark finding a niche in a space that was ready for disruption. There's a great kind of round trip story about the big player in the space and how Mark eventually grew to the size where he could acquire what was the 800-pound gorilla in the space before Mark started. And for those of you, who are still, getting used to the name Kronos, as Sarah mentioned, it's now UKG Group. And Mark really created what was the first computerized time clock for punch cards, for people who are punching into work, now to become a global software player in the HR and workforce management space. And so if you're a sports fan, you might see the UKG logo on certain jerseys and golf, polos and whatnot, and it's really become a global name. Mark, can you maybe tell us a little bit about your decision to enroll at Rochester and the opportunities it created for you and kind of how it launched you on your career?
Yeah, I had gone to MIT undergrad, but I really didn't like it. I took a year off, and Simon was taking its first full-time MBA class. So I applied and was accepted, and it kind of changed my life. So,
That's great. And Mark, in the book, you talk a little bit about the story of a program that you were involved with that involved kind of recruiting some folks from, I believe, some European schools and whatnot. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
yeah, there was an organization called ISAC. I think it still exists. And what it does is, for every traineeship you found in the United States or somebody abroad, you would send somebody abroad. And so I was head of the Rochester chapter, which enabled me to get to know the CEOs of most of the major companies in the Rochester area. And then I was elected as the management for all of our states. And I had to recruit students to.
Thank you, Mark. And Mark, it's a little hard to hear you through the phone right now. I'm not sure if there's a way to improve that a bit. Well, I'll go on to the next question, Mark. And if there is an opportunity to, I don't know, maybe get closer to the phone or something like that, that might be helpful because some of the audience has reported that it's tough for them to hear your voice. But the book explains the origin story and many of the ups and downs. Was there a moment in time when you felt that Kronos was really going to work, or perhaps the inverse, a moment where you felt that the business wasn't going to make it?
Yeah, there was many times in the early 80s when we were kind of on the edge of not making it. And then it was in the late 80s that we had gathered momentum and were big enough that then it just became a question of managing the company as a group.
That's helpful, Mark. I think one thing from an entrepreneurship standpoint, many U of R graduates or soon to be graduates are interested, in entrepreneurship. If you read through the book, I mean, they may face the same question that your mom asked of you, which was, how could you give up that great job offer or take all this risk with student debt outstanding? I mean, how did you answer your mom when she brought those questions to you?
Well, if you read the book, you see I was very close to my grandmother, who was an original entrepreneur. She grew up in a small town in called Russia, Poland, back and forth. And her husband's being left when she was 12 or 13. When he said, "Here's the money to come." She got to the States and she was living with some relative. And he came over and said, when are we going to get married? And she said, what are you going to do? what do you do? And he said, I have a very good job, I earn money, I'll be able to support you and our children. Well, what do you do? He said, well, I work for, he said, no, we're starting a business before we get married. And that kicks it off.
That's a great story. It's great to have that inspiration from your grandmother, Mark. And I guess it's always easier if your mom says, how can you take this risk? And you just say, well, you know, grandma told me it's okay.
Yes.
You know, one of the themes that I really like in the book is it touches on a theme of hiring for potential, you know, versus a resume or experience. And I think you had great success at Kronos doing that. It's not the safest path, but a path that worked out really well for you. Can you talk a little bit about that mentality in hiring for potential versus someone who, say, has the perfect resume?
Yes. I didn't look always for somebody who had the exact experience we were looking for. But what I did do was evaluate the person and who they were, what they'd done, how they related to the people in the companies they were at. And I figured if they had all those things, they could quickly adapt to the culture and what we were doing at the company.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious, did you receive any pushback from investors or other team members when you were making those hires?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for investors, for many years, I only wanted to raise money for common stock. And as is today, back then, they wanted stock that where they controlled the company, either bonds or preferred shares. And so I had to convince them that we weren't going to do that. And to be honest, if I had not done that, I probably would have gotten fired in the early 80s if I got the traditional kind of investor who invests.
Yeah, I think there's a theme in the book, Mark, that really talks to having kind of self-confidence and trusting trusting yourself essentially in making those bold decisions. And you really, I think, saw the best in people, despite maybe that being a hard thing for investors or other team members, you know, to get on board with. You know, the fact that you hired for potential versus that perfect resume, I think it really went a long way in building a team that was very loyal, you know, to Kronos, and a team that had kind of a chip on its shoulder, right? Something to prove because you took a chance on them. And I think that it was really fun to see in the book how that played out and how those individuals, you know, really were able to reach their potential through your leadership and help create, you know, a really meaningful business.
Yes, and I came to work every Saturday, and I was always surprised to see how many of the people I hired at work that day, because we had weekly meetings every Monday afternoon, and people would commit to finishing things by the following Monday. And if they didn't finish what they're supposed to finish, they came in on the weekend because they didn't want to go to the meeting and tell people they had not done what they were supposed to do.
Yeah, a little positive peer pressure.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, you know, the book really highlights that, the power of a team. Can you maybe share a little bit about how you created that winning team? Like, how did you recognize when it was time to add folks to the team or augment the team?
Well, first of all, I had a very good board who I recruited who were experienced business people, not necessarily money people. And we would talk a lot. And in the early 80s, I had an organizational consultant who helped me with those decisions. And starting in the late 80s, I hired a different organizational consultant who I talked to him and said, Langston's making decisions what to do next in the company.
Yeah, it's always, I think, great to have those people around you, right, that you can lean on. And I think if you think about the way the book ends, one of the notes at the end of the book is creating your own personal board of directors, not just a company board of directors, but a personal board of directors that you can turn to for your own career path, both in life and work. Uh, any advice for, well, first of all, who was on your personal board, and any advice that you'd have for students on creating their own personal board of directors?
Well, I mean, since I selected my company board so carefully, many of the people who were on my personal board were also on the company board. But I was very close to two of my brothers. I spoke to them all the time. I spoke to my grandmother all the time. But really, I put people on the company board who I was very friendly with, or got very friendly with, and who gave me great advice, either at the board meeting or quietly before or after.
That's great. It's excellent to surround yourself with, with people like that, right? Who can kind of keep you honest and keep you moving forward. Another question is, you looked at a lot of different business ideas before starting Kronos. The book actually mentions a radio yo-yo as a pretty obvious pass as an idea, but there were some other promising ideas. Sorry, Mark?
That was the first product we thought of.
Well, I think that, Kronos probably became a much larger business and overall footprint than perhaps the radio yo-yo. But what advice would you have for current students looking for their own great idea?
I think, first of all, you have to define what kind of idea you want to find. Our criteria was something that we could sell to almost anybody and everybody. Something that was priced at less than $10,000, and something that we could sell internationally over time. And those were our basic three criteria. And oh, by the way, if we could create something that was patentable, that was so much the better. And we did get a patent early on for reading and writing on time cards with Marx's techniques, which was kind of the foundation of the company.
Thank you, Mark. I have a tough question for you. What would you have done differently in the Kronos journey? It's a tough question because it was so successful, but if you could go back and do it again, what would you do differently?
I think I would hire a chief operating officer a couple of years before I did. I think that's the main thing I would have done differently, because I really needed somebody with real world big business experience, and I didn't have that, and nobody on my team had it. So adding that person was very, very helpful.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. I mean, it certainly worked out okay without that person on board, going from zero to a multi-billion-dollar revenue business. But always good to reflect on kind of what could have gone, differently or how to learn. And I guess that really feeds into the next question. How did you learn to adapt as a leader from a company that was a small, close-knit group, working above an ironworks plant, to a global entity with thousands of worldwide employees?
Well, as I said before, I had a really good consultant working with me in the early 80s, and another one who worked for a company called Predictive Index. And that company was founded by a man who designed tests so the U.S. aircraft people could test their pilots to see whether they were more or less likely to come back from a bombing mission over Europe. And after the war, he adapted that test to companies. And we found that test very, very useful. And in fact, we had quarterly off-sites every year. And I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years, we invited him to one of your sites. He was that vested and that knowledgeable about the company.
Thanks, Mark. I mean, it's really, I'm glad that you use the predictive index in terms of kind of ways to adapt yourself, as a leader as well. But it's pretty amazing. Not many people can go from, startup and concept and 5 to 10 people, to thousands of people. It requires a lot of kind of self-reflection and adaptation, to get to that level. And it's a rare trait. To end the last question on kind of the moderated panel here, the book talks about the importance of giving back. What advice would you have for students or those who are early in their careers about giving back? I mean, you've been very generous through the U of R and through a variety of other initiatives. What advice would you have for newly minted students?
If I know, Jim, is to find some charity that you get passionate about, that you really identify with, and connect with those as early as you can. And obviously giving money is one thing, but helping the people at the company is quite another. And I, especially after I retired from being a full-time person at the company, I did a lot of work with not-for-profits.
Yeah, I think that the impact of giving back is obviously huge. Mark, you've had a huge impact on a tremendous amount of students, and I think whether it's money or time, there's a real level of satisfaction in giving back. So I hope that you're a great example here for a lot of students as to how to give back, not just late in their careers, but throughout their careers. And you've had a long history of doing that, both at the U of R and at a lot of other places. We're going to turn it over to audience level Q&A now. I know that there is still some trouble with the audio. I think we're kind of doing the best we can there. But if you can submit questions through the dialogue box, I will bring them up as they come. We have a few already submitted, so I'll go ahead and jump right in, Mark. One of the audience questions is, can you discuss the challenges of running a business and balancing family life?
Very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. Particularly, all 3 of my children had some issues growing up. But you did the best you could. I mean, as I said, I was in the company most Saturdays, but I went to their events whenever I could. I talked to them about their homework, how they liked school, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's certainly not without sacrifice, right? That to give yourself to a business the way that you did, and to create something as large as you did. But I've met many of your kids and they're fantastic, so you did a good job balancing that, Mark. Yeah,
all 3 of my children are doing very, very
well. Another audience question here is, how have you benefited from the alumni network?
I was asked about, 12, 13 years ago to be a trustee at the University of Rochester, and I served 2 terms. And I met a lot of people from my era, as well as from a lot of other eras. And I still have those connections with friends. And they've been meaningful and helpful as I made decisions in my life after the company.
That's great. And I think, that actually ties into an earlier question that we had as well around building your personal board of directors. I think that students coming out these days have easier access to alumni networks that extend beyond just the folks that they know immediately, right? There's a whole online database that you can access, and there's an opportunity there to engage with other U of R alums. I found myself in my career that the U of R community is very open and willing to chat and to, and to engage. And I think that's a benefit sometimes of being part of a smaller school. So I think there's an opportunity there for folks to use that alumni network to build your own personal board, to establish connections. I know at our firm and some of our portfolio companies, we have a lot of U of R alums. So there's a great opportunity there. And I know Mark and others, even folks as successful as Mark are willing and happy to help. And one of the things I see students do sometimes is they're maybe a little hesitant to reach out, or they're afraid to ask. And I think you'd be surprised by how many people are willing and want to help, and they're not put off by the ask.
Well, I just got a note from one of the students there, who was able to go to the program, the MBA program, because of my generosity. And the note was just incredible, and thanking me and for changing their lives, and it was wonderful. And when I go to the university, I usually have my picture taken with all the current students who are under the AIN umbrella and with financing their education.
That's great. That's great, Mark. I feel like you've helped create the Mark AIN Mafia, right? There's so many folks that you've helped throughout your career. It's fun to see the impact.
Yeah,
Mark,
absolutely.
I've got another question that just came in here from Shirley, and her question is: what is your philosophy as how to bring out the best in people, especially your own children, whom you are proud of?
I think my philosophy is to encourage the right kind of behavior and discourage the wrong kind of behavior. And I did that with my children and at the company. Some of the people I recruited had come from very political environments. And I told them right up front, we don't do those sorts of things at Kronos. We're completely apolitical. We're in it to do the best for each other and the best for our customers. And so I think it's that simple: encouraging good behavior and telling people what good behavior is, and discouraging anything that that goes outside that realm is what you call bad behavior.
That makes a ton of sense. And I think when you encourage that, that good behavior and reward, incentives matter, right? And when you create the right incentives for your kids, or you create the right incentives for the workforce, you get a more motivated group of people, and both at the company, and then obviously your children have gone on to be great achievers themselves. So it's fun to see that philosophy extends, on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mark, we have another audience question here, which is: what is a book that has inspired you?
I'm sorry, what is the book has?
Yeah, do you have a book, another book that has inspired you that you would recommend?
Yeah. Wow, there are so many books. I just finished a history of the Lake Clinic from the time we started in Boston to the giant become west of Boston today. And it went through all the various years and all the various leaders, and it was very, very interesting. I very much enjoy reading books that talk about people who were successful and why they were successful and what they did.
That's great. I mean, when you read books about folks that are successful, you can always pick up a few kind of hints or tips on how to go about your own life a little bit better. And there actually was a question that was just submitted on: what skills do you think an entrepreneur needs to be successful?
Well, I think one is they have to be patient and they have to encourage the right behavior that disturbs your own behavior. I think they have to be willing to become the leader of a group of people and show leadership skills all along the way. Because without that, they're not going to succeed in the company, and they're not going to succeed very well in the real world. So I think that's kind of it. It's very straightforward, easy to do.
Yeah, I think in order to be successful, as you point out, you got to be a leader, right? You have to kind of lead from the front. No one bleeds for the prince in the palace, right? You got to be on the front lines with your people, leading and showing. There's one thing to put kind of a value system on the wall. It's another thing to be out there exhibiting those values on a day in and day out basis.
So, for example, we tended to get a lot of orders in right at the end of each quarter. And so I and some of the other executives would go up to a manufacturing facility and work hand in hand with the executives or workers who work there every day. And I think that inspired them, that we were able to help them do their job and do it right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the CEO of the company showing that they're not afraid to help kind of build the product, and that there's an all hands on deck mentality. It takes what it takes. I think makes a huge, huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Let's see. One question, Mark. What prompted it? The book talks about how you were a relatively private person and never really, sought the spotlight in your CEO career. What prompted you to write the book and tell your story?
Well, actually, my wife and my co-author were after me for probably 10 years. The co-author was somebody who would help me with my speeches last 10 years as CEO, so I knew him pretty well. And they finally wore me down. And
I'm glad he did.
Yeah. I'd never written a book before. I don't know whether I'll write one again. It's difficult. You really have to be very focused.
I'm sure. All the students out there that have, year-end papers to write, I think can relate.
Yeah.
Another question here, and this might be our last question depending on time. So if anyone has final questions, please send them through the dialogue box. But who is your role model? I think I know the answer to this, but who is your role model and why?
Let me think about that for a minute. There was one person in the Boston area whose company I had consulted for several times. And I really learned a lot from him. And I don't remember when he was on the board when I started. I know I asked him to be on the board. But that was kind of my role model. Whenever I thought about what to do or how to do it, I would what would Bob do? And sometimes I even call Bob up and say, can you help me on this one? So yes, you really need somebody who been there, done that, who you can bounce ideas off of. And it's best if you can recruit that person to your board of directors of the company.
Yeah, totally agree. And I said last question, but we got a new one in here from Shirley. I think it's a great question and be a good one to end on. What do you think she says, what do you think we can do to the educational system, whether it's from toddlers to a person who enters business school in her 40s? What can we do to promote a better and happier world?
Well, one of the things I've discussed and tried to lead on was, I think the students, while they're students, should get some practical experience. For example, at the Ames Center, I would like each of them to write a business plan and have that business plan critiqued by their other students, as well as picking that student up with a professor or somebody local who could help them with the idea. So, any other question, Brandon?
Yeah, no, that was very helpful, Mark. And actually, you and I were talking about this question kind of similarly the other day on, what promotes a happier world, or what makes, people feel fulfilled. And there was a great comment. I can't remember if it was Mark Andreessen or Ben Horowitz, but they're two founders of a firm called A16Z, and you might know them better as some of the folks who founded a company called Netscape back at like the beginning of the internet era. But they got asked that question, and the comment was a sense of abundance, and that could be, whether you're coming out of college with a bunch of debt, or you're a billionaire. A sense of abundance is a mindset, not necessarily a bank account number. So promoting a sense of abundance, and then a feeling of contribution. So a feeling that you're contributing to something, you're changing something, you're creating something. So I think, Mark and I were talking about Shirley's question the other day, and I think that if you kind of come with those mentalities of a sense of abundance, no matter what your station in life, and then you have a feeling of going into a role where you're contributing to something, you're contributing to that cause, or you're building something, I think that's what helps promote a happier world. So whether you're a toddler or, entering business school, Mark and I were talking about how those things are, valuable mindsets that kind of promote a happier world. You feel like you're contributing. And I think that, in kind of closing, what Mark created is a business that certainly had a great contribution to society. It helped make companies more efficient. He created a business with tens of thousands of employees that regularly gets ranked as one of the best places to work in the US, and helped kind of foster the Entrepreneurship Center at Rochester. So Mark, I think you're a role model for living that, sense of abundance and a feeling of contribution. So thank you for that. Thank you for joining us on the call here. I'm gonna invite Mark, any final comments that you have, but then I'll invite Duncan here, Duncan Moore, who is the Vice Provost of Entrepreneurship and has known Mark for a long time, to give some final kind of closing comments. So before I do that, Mark, anything on your end?
No, not really.
Well,
But
thank you.
One thing I'm going to talk about. We started on the third floor of an old ironworks building that was pretty run down, and visitors had to walk up the steps to the third floor, and frequently we had a tear in the carpet right when we came in, and that did not go well. But I started out every meeting by saying, obviously, we're a technical company, we're in the time clock business, but we're not into the real estate business. I think that's the tone for many of those meetings.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Mark. And Duncan, I will turn it over to you for final comments here.
Thank you, Brennan. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody who's got involved in this. President Megasoff, thank you for your introductory remarks for the presentation. To Brennan, who is the moderator for this, one of the things Brennan didn't say in his comments was that he was actually a mentor. He was mentored by Mark early on while he was a student here at the University of Rochester. Also, he is the one that purchased the books, the copies of his books, of Mark's book, which are being given to the students who are live there. A special thanks, obviously, to Mark. I obviously know Mark for quite a while, at least 16 or 17 years. One of the things from the very beginning when Mark and I met was his desire to be connected with students. It was very important when he was visiting campus to get a luncheon with the AIM Fellows. Sometimes they were interns, sometimes they were on scholarship money, but that connection was extremely important to him. He also, was very important in terms of giving back. He saw the opportunities here at the University of Rochester back in about 15, 16 years ago about what Rochester could be in entrepreneurship. That was very, very important to the growth of the AIM Center for Entrepreneurship and the gifts he's given to us. And we really appreciate that and the continuing support, both financially, but of your time. And then finally, to the staff of the President's Office and of the AIM Center who make all these things possible. As you probably figured out, there was a little bit of a technical difficulty at the beginning as we hustled to get this thing together just before the noon hour. And so to Amy, Becky, and Aaron, thank you so much. And thank you for everybody else who is attending. If you have any other questions you want to submit, please submit them to us at the AIM Center and we will pass them along to Mark. Thank you and have a good afternoon.
Okay. I received in the last couple of weeks a letter from a student that I had given a scholarship to, is now out in the world working. And the student could not thank me enough for how that had changed his life. And that's something I feel very, very good about. Okay, well, thank you, Duncan. And
You're
thank
welcome. Thank you.
that helped make this happen. And thank you, Brendan, for moderating.